Some people would call me an owl, an older, wiser learner. Other people call me a reentry student. But nonetheless, in 2010, I returned to UC Davis to complete my education. And what I found is education is never completed. What I found when I went into the PhD program at UC Davis is a whole layer of different ways to look at California's people. It wasn't simply about the gold rush. Some people came to California looking for treasure that we had not imagined. And even as we talk about the gold rush, um, I have to preface this Convention of Colored Citizens of California and their quest for the treasure of public education for their children. As we talk about the gold rush, it started before 1849 for Black folk. And and the gold was here. What you will find in California is that there were a kaleidoscope of folks: Indians, African Americans, Spanish. Um, some call themselves mulatto, some call themselves mestizo. But the bottom line is there was a mixture in California, or what we call Alta California, and at that time Mexico, of people who weren't simply who were a part of the land. Many of the Native Americans were seen as savage, some noble savages, but nonetheless, they knew that the land, how to work with the land, and were very aware of its value, more so than just the stone, but also with the minerals, with the planting, with managing the land. It was something that was not taken for granted for European and Spanish people who came to Alta California. But this mixture of people began to show itself in many different ways. It was better to be Spanish without Native American or Indian or African in blood. However, there were Africans already who in Mexico who had fought, who would fight for Mexico. And also there were Africans who were there here in Alta California who would fight for what would become California, the United States of one of the states of California. So this mixture of people would lay the foundation for a migration of African Americans from the South. And these African Americans were educated many times. Some were slaves. When they arrived as slaves, many times they would be given their freedom, not because of the mercy or the generosity of their owners, but once a master arrived in the slave, into the gold mines with a slave, he was tend to be seen as someone with a unfair advantage. And so at many times, slaves would be given their freedom. But what truly invited and began this movement of African Americans to California was this idea of full citizenship. At the time, there was a treaty that came forward that said, at the end of the war, that any person who was in this land, when it became a state, would become a full citizenship. It would be the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And why was this important? Because African Americans were looking for full citizenship. And this is where the convention would come through. When they arrived, During this actual movement, and many people have heard about the Bear Flag Revolt. It was the beginning of the rebellion from Mexico to the United States. And there were many people involved of African descent. And one of them was John Grider. I bring him up because he was a blacksmith in Solano County. He was known as one of the people to actually paint the flag, the first bear on the California Republican flag. And he was also one of the people who gained gold and sent back for his family. And this was in 1846, 1848. So we already have a movement and showing of people who were willing to fight for their rights. Unfortunately, as California moved forward with its constitution, and this is all a foundation for understanding the convention, it truly showed that it was looking forward to creating a white state. In Monterey during 1849, and then there was the convention for the Constitution of California. There was a discussion, and one of the governors, Spanish governors of Mexico, the Mexican territory at the time, in his negotiation, wanted to make clear, and through his interpreter, he said, though we have dark skin, speaking of people who are from Mexico, we are in full leadership. And we do not want to be penalized for our dark skin. So please clarify what you mean by white. And it was said that, for sure, we are talking about those who are of African or Indian descent. Now, this governor, his name was Noriega Guerrero, and he said, we want to make sure that we are not deprived of the privilege of citizenship. We want to indicate that white excludes the African race and also the Indian race. This is important in understanding the foundation of education in California. It was clear that they would want it to educate children, but if there were children of African or Indian descent, that was not going to be acceptable. However, there were some who would come, like Elizabeth Thorne Scott. She lived in Sacramento, and from her home in 1846, she developed her own program of education for children of color. And she said that all children, whether they be Black, Indian, Mexican, could come and be educated in her school. This is an important point because her school was supported by the parents. They would bring her eggs, chicken, whatever they can afford to keep it moving forward. So she had the first Black school or private school for children and it went on until 1854. Once she remarried, there would be a J.D. Sanderson who would come forward and take over the school for her. J.D. Sanderson would be one of the leaders in the convention. I continue to kind of pull this foundation for you about the convention, about African Americans coming to the land, because these people would be the foundation for a network of private Black schools. And they would continue on with their work and make sure that they understood and that there would be an understanding that Black children, there were their future. First, what had to be addressed was slavery in California. And it was a mixture of opinions. There were all kinds of people who were making decisions publicly in the newspapers about how slavery should act here in this state. Mostly slavery was abhorred, and that is because it would undermine free labor. These people, mostly men, coming to California, looking for their labor, to make a living, to make a stake, not just in gold, but in land, did not want to compete with those who were Indian or who were slaves. They would always lose in the price. It would be a cheaper labor, especially if they were slaves or slavery. So there was an underlying negative movement. There were slaves in Napa, and there were slaves in the gold fields. There were slaves in pockets along California. There were people like Reverend Thomas Starr King. He didn't believe that Native Americans, people from Peru, were necessarily equal, but he opposed slavery. And he and many others would join together, travel the country, and release slaves, especially from Napa and from the mines. But he was clear that he did not believe there should be a mixing of people. And that's where the convention came in. The convention began early. The first convention was held in 1855 in Sacramento. Mifflin Gibbs, Mr. Moore, T.J. B. Wards, J.B. Sanderson were all there. And what they wanted in this convention, what we're deciding, how would they go forward to secure 3 rights? They wanted the right to testimony. Remember, we're talking about 1850. We're seeing Black people with money who are living here in California, about 4,819. They averaged what at that time, about $2,918,000 worth of land and property. They paid taxes. And the convention came together to say, we want the right to testimony. We want the right to vote. More importantly, we want a right to education. And these were the tenets that they could all agree on as they move forward. Very well organized. They stayed on they were planted on the foundation of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, founded basically in Philadelphia, and it was called the Emmanuel Church. The first African American church in the African Methodist Church in California, Sacramento, but then the one that would become most prominent when it came to private education for Black children was the San Purian African Church in San Francisco. Literally, the convention gained and raised $50,000. They raised the church, and underneath they placed a school. In their minutes, the first teacher, Dr. Moore, who was also a preacher in the Methodist Church, he was clear to make sure that he kept the numbers of the number of children and people who were coming for education. And within a 3-month period, it went from 23 students to 93. And they kept gaining and kept gaining students. And the first strategies that would happen as these little schools, usually in churches, but sometimes it would be in people's homes, from Stockton all the way to El Dorado, how they would establish is they would come in, create the school, gather the Black students. They would teach them ABCs, all the different numbers. Then they would go forward and they would say to the council of the town, why don't you come and sit for a recital? And of course, usually the people in charge were white men, and they would come and they would be impressed with the education that was being given by these private schools. And at that time, the convention or the Black leader in that area would request some type of funding for the school. And that was the strategy for planting schools. Now, my original research began in 2010, and I studied the schools beginning in Stockton, and it moved from San Joaquin County, Solano County, Yolo County. It was only here within the last year or two that I understood that it expanded to also to El Dorado County. And it was through the African Methodist Church. Now, when we talk about the convention, and I say the convention when I'm talking about the group of people, but many times people talk about the convention as an assembly, when people got together, what they gained, what they raised. But I talk about the convention as this group of people, and I hope to keep you in mind. And as I move forward, I will use little terms colored, Negro, because those are the terms of the time. Now, the convention wasn't always in agreement amongst themselves. They developed these first strategies for getting education and establishing these private schools, and they were very successful. But they were still clear. They weren't getting the monies from the state that they were paying into taxes. They felt that they were doing everything as citizens, but they weren't realizing the gifts of citizenship. And that was their true treasure. So J.B. Sanderson, who was part of the convention and had taken over the school in Sacramento, he went to the governors, and he said in Sacramento, may I sit for the actual certificate to teach? And they granted him that right based on what they saw the children. Once he was given his certificate for teaching, he began to move and train other teachers and asked for them to sit. Now, as they're moving on, we have some people who are very well off. And one of them will be Mifflin Gibbs, along with Peter Lester. And I bring up Peter Lester because his family, through the trails, followed the trails from Philadelphia to California and established in San Francisco a business. It was the first imported shoe and leather business emporium in San Francisco. He was very well off, but not only that, his children benefited from his success. They were looking for a better life, and they found it for their daughter, Sarah Lester. Sarah Lester, she attended a Spring Valley grade school in San Francisco. It was in a prestigious white area, and she went to school with white children. She continued on through public school. there was no question. There was nothing asked of her. They didn't believe, there was no question on whether she belonged until she reached the age of high school. Sarah Lester, from a rich family, who appeared to have very, very fair skin, for the first time was challenged about her abilities to attend the high school. Now, she completed, at that time, there was only one high school in San Francisco. The convention was watching this carefully. She completed her exams that all students had to take, and she scored #1 in artistic talent and #2 in academic success. She was 15, it was 1858, and she was admitted into the school. And that's when you see a barrage of people on all different sides opposing her interest to school because she was Black. The white newspapers, they debated. The Board of Education came forward with articles. The concern was this: a stranger on reading these would think that white children and Negro children were going to be promiscuously involved in school. But Lester her entry into the school wasn't about her ability. It was about her being. So Thomas Starr, the clergyman, he said basically that he was not for it, that he felt that the inferior races should not be educated along with the white races, and that we continue to move forward and for segregated education. But yet there were no taxes or nothing supporting the schools. Thomas King and another man named Mulder, he also went forward, and he said, if we allow these African American and Indians to attend school, then there will be a mixture of blood. And this was the fear of amalgamation, the blending of people. Now, what was interesting is when the Constitution of California was put through, there was this big discussion about who was considered a citizen, white, and then there was non-white. But there was nothing specified within the school code at that time on who would get monies for their school. So once this became an issue with the Lester girl, there was a change in the school district and in the school code. And the code began to say, no child who is African descent or Indian descent should attend a school of any county. If that happens, if we find that there are children of these descents in your schools, you will not receive appropriations. So there was a notable high school principal who came forward on behalf of Sarah. And she said, this child is as good as any child. So we have in the newspaper this damaging information, the battle that was once just about getting private schools and the strategies of supporting these private schools through the Black community. The Black community all of a sudden felt challenged. They felt that there would be no way that they can get this movement, that they can get people to accept them as full citizens, even if they were to do everything that would be considered financially successful. In an article, it said, we hold it to be wise and true policy to remain the social and powerful integrity of the white race, and that inferior people of these other races should not be taught together. California was in an uproar. And there was a response in the newspapers from many of the convention members saying, if not us, then who? We love this land. We are born of this land, and we should be accepted of this land. But it was without, it fell on deaf ears. So at that time, in 1858, after the Sarah Lester event, there became a movement. The convention began to send letters to Panama, Mexico, Canada, all over. And the question was simply, if we come and bring our funds, if we come and we bring our money, will we be given full citizenship? And the answer to many was yes. The call came from Canada, from Fraser River. Fraser River had also a gold boom. They discovered gold, but they had no people. This was also part of the British, who had outlawed slavery in 1834. At this time, the convention and this group of African Americans were afraid that they could easily be taken from the street and moved forward and removed. Therefore, there was a great migration of 800 people who left California, taking their funds, moving them to Canada. This movement broke the back of the private education, but not the convention. Many people stayed. So what we have first is there was a movement of the California law that shows that basically we have these children and they will be educated, and that we are not going to we're not going to count the children. It moved forward to having white children counted. Once again, the law changed. We will allow children of African and Indian descent admission to the schools if they are under white guardianship. And then the law was rewritten again, and it required the counties to provide separate schools for Indian and children of African descent. But the convention once again had to figure out how to get it done. Here we have Peter Lester. He was so, felt so demeaned by what happened to his daughter. He would be one of the people who would leave. He would leave everything that he owned and move to Fraser River. His wife was considered the pillar of the African American community. Yet, when it came down to her daughter, her family was attacked. And instead, her husband was considered, the question was asked, did he marry a white woman? Was she actually white? Which was a death sentence for her husband. When she moved to Fraser River and letters were sent to her about what had happened to her daughter, she refused to speak about it. She refused to talk about it. She was so hurt. Mifflin Gibbs would continue to stay, And this is where El Dorado County comes in. The convention not only put forward these people who would, they're not only the people who would leave, there would be a core group that would stay and support the school. By then, it would be about 1864, 1865, coming the ending of the war. And there were many other tools that the convention would have. The 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendments, which would allow them to take their case to court. They would do that using a young girl named Mary Frances Ward. And by then, we're moving into the 1870s. There's money coming, and we don't know how, I haven't discovered how, from the gold mines in El Dorado County. In El Dorado County, in 1860, the federal census counted there were 772 African American landowners in El Dorado County alone. This is a trying time because it's still the Civil War. So the convention had a committee of people who had aliases. And those people were in charge of moving African American slaves through California into what I believe the hills. And that's why we see such a huge group of African Americans in the El Dorado Hills. Now, there were some people who were not quite sure who their names were or what their aliases were, but we know that they did back the Mary Frances Ward Supreme Court case. They did include and move to have education in the hills. And this is where I began to get excited. I was brought in by the Burgess family. They had questions about their family in El Dorado County. And in doing so, I found that the AME Church had established a church, a minister there named Jennifer, J.T. Jennifer, in 1863. He moved into what's called a 6-point circuit, where he traveled around 6 points in El Dorado County, preaching to the masses there. That's how many African American children and families lived in El Dorado County. He established a church in Placerville. And in 1865, when he left the church in Placerville, there was also a parsonage. He had paid $2,500 to have the church built, and he had only left it with a debt of $80. He was a missionary, and his job was to move around these 6 points, including Coloma, and educate the African American children there. It was called the School for Colored Children. I'm still digging to find out more about it, but I'm clear that Jennifer was there and that there was a church in Placerville and also a church in Coloma. As the movement of the Black people or rich Black people to Fraser Valley depleted the monies for the private schools, they then had to move forward and continue to bring the monies from the gold fields into the school. It was a local movement that I was unaware of. And even though Mary Frances Ward's job, her case would be heard in the Supreme Court, the convention would put forward and say that we understand that our future relies in the education of our children. And eventually in 1874, the California Supreme Court ruled that they were right, that education was as valuable and as protected under the law as would be a piece of land. And therefore, these kids, these children should be educated. And so there was a partial win with the Ward case. We went from Sarah Lester, and there was a movement of people from California, because they could not get the civil rights they wanted, to Mary Ward, and the winning of the Supreme Court ruling stating that, yes, you can have education, but the funds must be separate. But still, we have in El Dorado County what I see the same strategies of looking towards the council, but then looking towards the Hill and supporting these schools. We have yet to understand who was behind, how it was funded, the people involved. And that is one of the reasons why I believe that California is one of those national sites. We can see this 20 years prior to the rulings on segregation at the federal level. We already have in California, from the California Supreme Court, a ruling regarding segregated education. And while it might seem a partial win, it was a win nonetheless for the convention. I wonder, and what I have come to find in Coloma is traces of an underground railroad. Movement of people, not quite understanding who was in charge, but seeing these people move through the area. I began to talk to the Burgess, and I believe in all our families, especially in California and some in other places, there's hints, there's evidence of what actually occurred in Coloma and El Dorado Hills. I hope that there will be a look into the Emmanuel Church. It was only when a document was brought to me by the Burgess family showing that the property in which the church sat on was sold to their great-grandfather for delinquent taxes, that I began to see that there was a network, not only of African Americans within the convention, but of their white allies supporting them and helping them move forward. Now, many of these documents are held in private homes, and it's only when they bring them forward to be evaluated do we now begin to see the big picture. And what we must be able to do is expand history, because this is all of our history, to include these documents. There's a conundrum that I just found. And there's a Bickert store in Coloma, California. And the way it was built, brick by brick, most people don't think much about it, still stands. But I recently found out from the state rangers that there is an underground tunnel in that railroad. It went under an underground tunnel underneath that store. And it was wondered, what could it be used for? We're still trying to find out. There's only these stories that are passed down through families, and I'm trying to find more. I'm trying to connect to more families of all different colors, because we have that within the state park. We have this mixture, this kaleidoscope of people. That's the Burgess brothers holding a picture of their great great grandfather, because there's three Burgess, Rufus M. Burgess. There's Rufus Elder Burgess, there's Elder Rufus Burgess, Rufus M. Burgess, and by 1919, we find Rufus III. How do they know these stories? They tell me the story of their mother and their uncle putting them in a car and driving this dirty roads and dusty ways up till, and as hot it was, to Coloma, and how their uncle would sit there and cry and point to the land that they once owned. They didn't think much of it as children, but as they got older, they learned to value that and also begin to look. This is the Burgess mom. And I'm bringing this family forward only because I have the documents, the original documents showing that of their roots there. Their mother continued to write down their history and what Stephen Hilton would call a citizen's history. And here you find that this is Tonya Burgess, along with their mother, who kept moving it forward, telling these stories, writing these letters to the state rangers, and finally putting a headstone for Rufus Burgess. And then once again, we see the story moving on. This is Tonya Burgess and her granddaughter in Coloma, telling these stories, passing this history along, this oral history. And what we have come to understand through the convention, through their notes, is that the oral history that we have in California must be given weight. Whether it comes from Chinese Americans or whether African Americans, or Native Americans, Japanese Americans, that must be given weight and held here in the parks and shared. There's a richness that comes from our families. I think we all feel it, especially now through this pandemic and these hard times. And I'm not bringing the convention forward as being a group that is without question, because even as they won segregated education for schools, for the Black schools, and funding for those schools, when it came time for a young girl named Mamie Tate to come forward, Chinese girl, and go to school, she was not accepted in the white schools nor the segregated Black schools. But her mother was able to take her case to court based on the case of Mary Ward and win education for her daughter. So there was always a divide between people. But in Coloma, we see more of a mixture in a kaleidoscope of people. I'm asking that we take a deeper look in our own attics, in our own family stories, and see what we can bring forward, just as we talk about the convention. So I'm open for questions, if you have any. No?
Oh, that was just amazing. Thank you so much, Tina. Boy, that was quite a revelation. I do feel like there's quite a few questions. So the actual conventions for California, there was more than one, I guess, or
There were three.
What was, there were three. Okay, there were
Mhm.
three.
There were three.
And so each, and so
Mhm.
they were, and each one of them, I guess, was, you know, kind of a coming together of people that then made, you know, basically certain demands, I guess. Is it kind of like
Actually, the
convening
right.
like a Congress? I mean, it was
was.
like 3 times they came together.
There were representatives from each, what we would consider counties or cities: Coloma, El Dorado Hills, Shasta, all over California. There would be representatives who would come together to decide in which direction should they go. What would be the most important points that they should reach? And they didn't all agree. There were quite a few arguments well, how could I say, disagreements on how do we move forward. What should be our front face, our face to the public? But they were organized, and they did move in for their three most important points: the right to testify in court, the right to vote, the right to public education for their children. The right to education was just as important. And these conventions weren't just in California. They were collected to Oberlin College. And Oberlin College, they had conventions of people, South Carolina, North Carolina, all over, in coming to and unifying in those certain areas to meet the needs of the people there.
Wow. I'm sure
Tina,
others have all kinds of questions. Go ahead.
I got a question. This is John Burgess. You mentioned, I got 2 questions, so I don't want to hog anybody's time. But first question, the group that went to Canada, did they stay involved? Did they assist in any way, or did they just cut all ties once they left and said, you guys here in the US are in your own?
No, there continued to be a connection. And that it's funny because this is how I came into this study in 2010, John. I was looking at an orphanage for 300 kids in Solano County in 1860. And as I looked at this orphanage, there were constantly these movement of letters from Nova Scotia and Fraser River. And what they would do is submit, the people there would submit for admittance into white organizations, like the Good Templars organization. They would be admitted, and then they would show up, and they would be Black, and there would be a hoopla. So what they were continuing to do was challenge from Nova Scotia and from Fraser River. And there would be some who would actually return, like Mifflin Gibbs left, but then he returned and kept on with the fight for not only public education, but citizenship and equal rights.
Thank you. Second question, and I'll be done. You said there were 600 landowners in El Dorado County, over 600 in 1860 something?
In the 1860 federal census. The youngest was
772.
Yeah, 772. Now the convention, and this is amazing, the convention counts that earlier on, about 1855, that there were 1,000 landowners in El Dorado County. 1,000.
Where do they go? Where did that wealth go? Because wealth is on land. Where did it go?
And that's the big question. That is the big question that I can understand. I came to Coloma, and sending to Holly Thane and many of the rangers, I sent a cryptic message: where are the children? Because that's how I find the people. I'm looking for the children. And that's how I found this school for colored children in El Dorado County and the 6 preaching points. Also found a letter from a young white educated man who went to church in Coloma. He sent a letter back to his family. He said he was ashamed of himself that he almost didn't enter into the hall because of the number of Black folk were there. He said there were over 400. And so he had to overcome his prejudice in order to worship God. That's an amazing community of people.
Tina, this is Tanya. I have
Yes.
a question.
Sure.
So you said there were over 1,000 landowners. So are they considering Negro Bar a part of El Dorado County?
The boundaries move. The boundaries change. But yes, Negro Bar, Negro Hill, considering it, there was a big, actually there was a village, a Negro village that was centered around what was called Negro Hill. And that was a gold site for Black gold miners.
And landowners, clearly.
Yes, clearly landowners.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Clear landowners.
This is Matthew speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. That was an awesome presentation. So if I heard you correctly, you said it was in the federal census that you found the landowner. Is there some reason why they didn't show up within the state census or within the state data? If you can elaborate on that.
That I wish I could elaborate on that. And that would require more study. And actually I think they are there, but there is an erasure. There's no other way for me to put it. There is a Black exclusion when it came to public education, when it came to land rights. So it's going to be very difficult to bring these people forward, but it's necessary.
So would you, and maybe you can attest to this or not, I don't know. Would you find it strange then for I guess Black people to be issued deeds in that time frame, or not strange? I don't know.
I believe now, because I see within Marysville and also through the El Dorado County, that through allies, and these were usually white men in power, that deeds were issued and held in trust.
Yes.
Locating those deeds, that is going to take us some time. And I believe some of them are in the state archive.
Okay. Thank you so much. There is some in county and during that time, and his family. So for those of you in that line, you can look up Mr. Ingham, see what he did, and his wealth went not only to Illinois, where he came from, but his wealth also came back to Coloma, landed in Placerville, and they're still wealthy today. So look up the Ingham family.
Yeah, I know it is an important ruling for Black people before slavery ended, before they were truly safe, for them to stand up for the rights of to be heard in court, to testify in court, the right to public education, and the right to vote. And in their own words, they say The convention says on November 20th, 1871, whereas the colored citizens of California are being deprived educational rights and the rights of citizenship for their children equal to those granted to other children, we declare that the amendment of the Constitution of the United States and the Civil Rights Bill give us full educational privileges, which we cannot obtain in the caste schools as now organized. Unless these privileges are granted us, we will appeal from the unjust public sentiment to the highest tribunal in the land. This is the writing we have coming from the convention.
Wow. So that's even later. I wanted to ask a little bit more. I'm sorry, this is Jennifer again. I want to hear more about, because now that's a convention that's after that 1965 point. So I'm wondering when the last one was. But then I'm also wanted to go back to just this. I think you said it was a church or a school or both in Placerville, and kind of what else you can say about that, where you found that, you know, are there leads? How can we find out more about that?
You know, I have been talking to Andrew McLeod about where could this church have been located. And this is something that Tanya mentioned a little bit earlier, where we have the information passed on through families, but where is the evidence of that church? We know it existed. We know that the land was there, the parsonage and the church. But why is it not included in the history of Placerville? We also know that Coloma.
Well, where is it that you know the church? When you say we know it?
Well, let me put it from the history of the Methodist of the Minutes. That's one thing the convention did. I'm taking mine from the primary sources, which is the convention's minutes, and also the minutes of the African American Methodist Episcopal Church. They are the ones who brought Reverend Jennifer from back east here to California. He was ordained by T.M.J. Ward in San Francisco. And then he was sent to the El Dorado area, which is called the Placerville Circuit. And there he is said, and is noted, and they have the deeds for a land. He paid $2,500 to build the church and the parsonage, and left it with a debt of $80. But what are the remnants of that church? We don't know. To have an African-American church in Placerville says a lot about its makeup. But yet, we have yet to find in the history, at least that I'm finding in Placerville, the mention of this church. We only have the church in Coloma to base our understanding of the community, the African-American community in El Dorado County.
Wow, thank you. Who else has questions? I'm sure there's some more out there.
You know,
I wanted to thank you. There was just so much too about, you know, some of the other groups, you know, I mean, particularly, you know, you really did sort of paint that picture of just this institutionalized racism, really. And, you know, just the Indians in particular seeming to be identified, you know, kind of equally with the Black community as, you know, being this separate other, you know, status. So that was really helpful, just because it seems like it was so clearly documented.
It was. You know, Mamie Tape said, and it was interesting that Mamie Tape, Mary Tape, the mother of Mamie Tape, she was trying to get her child admitted into the school that Sarah Lester went to as a child, and that she would use Mary Ward's court case to do it. But she said in a letter to the Alta California News, "What right have you to bar my child out of the school because she is Chinese? You have expended a lot of public money foolishly, all because of one poor little child. It seems no matter how a Chinese may live or dress, they are hated. I will let the world see, sir, what justice there is when it is governed by the race of prejudiced men." And she would eventually win. But it just goes to show you that even though the Supreme Court had ruled that through Justice Wallace, he said that education was a legal right, distinctly so, as the vested right in property. Owned is a legal right, and such it is protected and entitled to be protected by all of the guarantees by other legal rights are protected and secured to the processor. So there was this battle of education as something that is innately solid and important, just as property was, the right to live.
Well, there is just so much here to learn more about. I am just so grateful for you laying out this incredible foundation. I have one more, hopefully this is an easy question. I just going back to the first, when you said the Treaty of Hidalgo, I thought that was very interesting because that was, I guess that was, before statehood. So that was with the United States and Mexico.
Yes, it was.
Right. And the Guadalupe Hidalgo, but, basically the, resolution of the Mexican-American War. Mm-hmm. But at that point, I guess it was I'm trying to remember the sequence there, but so we made that treaty. But so I just, if you can just kind of recap what you were saying was in that treaty, because that treaty would have, I guess, then related to the territory, the land that was going to be coming into the United States as a territory.
Yes.
But what can you just recapture what was in that treaty and because that was obviously resolving something between the United States and Mexico, and then it sounded like there was something very specific about what it meant for Black people.
Well, to think that the Alta California, for sure, there were many Mexican governors who owned land. And it was within California, for example, General Vallejo. And it was important to them that they retained their property and their citizenship. And so to do that, the treaty had a clause that any person, no matter what their makeup, if they were present during at the time of statehood, they would be considered a citizen of the state. And that was the draw for many African Americans or people in the South who saw themselves as mulatto. But it came to find out that mulatto, a Mexican mulatto, might be different than African American mulatto. But they saw it as mulatto.
Well, this is just so rich. There's so much more here, and I hope that you will continue to pursue all of this, because there's so many pieces, and that actually brings up the question of, because there is so much, is there a piece of this that you will then be continuing to work on?
I think with the most important piece at this point for me, I thought that once the convention, the convention was going to establish a college. It would have been a historically Black college in Stockton. I thought in the 1870s, once the Ward case was decided, they gave back the money that had been collected for that college. However, what I'm coming to understand now is that there was still a move for Black education in the El Dorado Hills area. So what did that look like? What did the agriculture look like? Who owned the land, and how did the change occur over time? This movement of people and the exchange of land. What facilitated it? So that's where my focus is at this time.
Great. Well, we will definitely look forward to updates on your work. Is there anybody else out there? Maybe last call here for questions from
I have a question.
Tina.
Well, this is, first of all, this is so fascinating, and it just makes me desire to dig deeper into the history, because it's like, oh my gosh, this is just scratching the surface, you know?
It is.
And it's so awesome, and it, to me, I just think it's fascinating, especially someone we live here in Placerville, so we want to know these things.
Mhm.
And not only that, with the current climate that we have with race and things like that, you know, I don't like fight. My grandmother loved history, so I come from a family that adores history. I don't want to destroy it, but I instead find a way to get people to see that they're a part of it. Does that make sense?
It is our history. And if we don't allow for expansion, what will happen is what was happening now. It will implode. If we don't, when it comes to symbols and words, their meanings change over time. And a symbol that might be, or a word that might mean something 50 years ago might mean something different now. And it's important for us to mine that out, dig it out. What did it mean? Where did it come? What does it mean now? And be able to talk about it. You're absolutely right. This is our history. Where was that African-American church, that AME church in Placerville, along with the parsonage? Where was it located?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Like, there's so much that I grew up in Arizona, and I was telling Jennifer, we took in the 5th grade, we took Arizona. And Arizona was the Anasazi Indians and the Navajo and the Hopi. And it's like, look at this history here, and it's not being taught. And then it's being misinterpreted, and so how can we, and I just, not to plug myself, but I'm running for city council. So it's something that I really want to understand. So if I hopefully end up on city council, it's something that I can pursue further. Like, how do we show this? This is not something that people in Placerville know. They just think it's a bunch of old white men that came here, and it's like, no, this was such a diverse area.
And that is the key to it all. Is to number one, we have to drop our defenses.
Yeah.
And be cognizant of, I must be cognizant of who I'm speaking to and how their growth is happening at the same time mine growth, or maybe didn't. Listen, I grew up in Benicia, California, born and raised Californian. All I knew is State Park. my playground was a state park, the state capitol there, the third state capitol. I wrote every year on that park. But I never knew that there was a Black man that was named Adam Willits, who was a slave, who stood in those same halls where I sat in a desk and was given his manumission papers, his freedom papers. I never knew that there was a Black, and that happened in 1854. That was not a part of me growing. I did not learn that until I entered a PhD program at UC Davis in 2010. So I am, and when I found out, I was hurt. What made it easier is the acceptance of some people to hear it. I literally was hurt. I was like, in a way, I kind of felt denied that not only I, but the people who had said, my peers who are white and all different colors might have saw me differently if I had been included in the history. And that's what I think you see, is that frustration of exclusion instead of expanding.
Oh, it's just so apparent to me. It's just, I don't know. It's just, there's so much. And you know, my grandparents are from Aruba, so I don't really have a lot of that history. But somebody who identifies as white, Hispanic, you know, we were still taught, oh, this is your history, this is your history. And you know, right now, and I just like to just come out and say stuff, is the African American experience is so unique and to African Americans, and it's so amazing, and the stories are so great, and it makes me sad that African Americans have been cheated of that. And not only African Americans, Americans have been cheated.
That's right, because like I said, it's all of our history. And
Yeah.
if we begin to talk about like the convention and how well they were organized, how well they spoke, the debate on whether can we go to war and stand up for America when America doesn't stand up for us. And this is a very public argument, and which I think we can continue to have over and over again. Are we full citizens? And you can name the newest group of people, and I even include poor white people. Are we full citizens? Yes.
Thank you. Very awesome.
I want to make a comment. This is Bill.
Hi, Bill.
I grew up in the East Coast, and you know, thinking back on my history lessons when I was in high school, and they seemed very whitewashed. I mean, when I got older and went to college, and even my undergraduate work, the history that was taught there really didn't talk about the immigrants and the Native Americans and people who were important to the establishment of this country, no matter where you were. And I just hope some of this gets imported to the high schools in the area where the children that are coming up now can learn some of this stuff. And I think this is very important. And I look sadly at some of the, thinking about my high school history classes had none of the important stuff, even the immigrants from where my family came from in Finland, or people that were Native American.
Yes.
Was included in any of the high school history lessons. And I think this is very important. What you just described tonight, all of this should be incorporated in high school, history lessons.
Exactly. And if not in the schools first, because that's another big giant fight. If not in the schools first, then let's start it in the state park. And
Yes.
This is what I'm thinking. By talking about this moves the California state parks onto the national level. What you see happening with African Americans leaving in mass to look for citizenship is this argument on the federal level. It will lead to the Civil War. And it's already happening in California, 1850, 1849. It's happening here. And it's an amazing thought that we are the microcosm of the precursor to what will happen on the federal level. That's why we should be looked at as a national park. Okay, that's a pitch. I know it's a pitch, but I can back it up with primary documents. That's all I can say about that. Yeah. And we need to make room for families like the Burgesses. And I know there's many other Japanese, all kinds of families. In Coloma, El Dorado is really interesting, the mixture of people. Catholic people who were demonized at the time. For there to be a Catholic church in Coloma is amazing. They were demonized at the time. So how is it that El Dorado became this crucible of diversity at a time when it was in 1850, almost 15 years before the Civil War? How did that happen?
And I feel like that goes back to this whole incredible crossroads of, you know, again, it's the waterway and the landway. It's the Golden Field to the Golden Gate to the Gold Fields. You know, it's just this path, and then you know the trails, of course, that came, you know, from Missouri, you know, out to the mountains. And so that is just part of it, is that you had these pathways just leading to that, and then you had that other north-south with the gold. You know, it just in the formation of the land. But yeah, I think that you know, it is compelling because, you know, somehow there was you're calling it a crucible. There just was this concentration of things going on and things catalyzed, and yes, this revelation that you were going to have an exodus, you know, once all these people got here and they were disillusioned that this is not going to be the dream. That is just mind-blowing. I mean, what a story, and an important story about, you know, just understanding Canada, even our partner, you know, to the north. So this has just been such a rich, amazing, you know, just bunch of connections tonight. I am so grateful for this program. So thank you.
I thank you for listening.
Oh, go ahead. It sounds like there's more. We don't have to stop. There's some more. Go ahead. Is that Ruth?
Oh, it's Ruth. Yeah. Hi, this is Ruth. You know, just following up to the comment about the great diversity that once was here and the disappointment of many who left, I think this is more of a rhetorical question, not meant to be answered, and why now is this such a white county? And with such a lack of diversity, what you know, like you were saying, like the presenter was saying, how things change after 50 years, what something meant once and how the meaning of it changes. Well, also, how do shifts in populations occur and why? And what was happening 100 years ago? What was our history 50 years ago? And how did we end up where we are today? So,
why? Yeah, that is amazing. That is an amazing question. What happened? I can show through documentation pulled from Chris that there became a protection of the women of people of color begin to put men of color, any color, begin to put their land in the name of their female partners, daughters, wives. It's as for protection, but protection from what? I have a H.B. Pierce, who is well known in agriculture in Coloma as a gardener, but I also have an H.B. Pierce who is listed as a colored man as a gardener. What's the connection? It is, but these people were connected in ways that we can't see yet, that have been kind of erased. Well, I don't think erased, have been buried. That's amazing to me. What happened? What happened? You guys are going to keep me going, but there's one story that I found, and it was about Andrew Monroe III. He was 18 years old, and he was, I guess, was a skilled masonry, maybe bricklayer. I'm not sure. He was called out of town to work in, I forget where. And he spent the night in the home. And the next morning, people were notified that he had died of a heart attack. Andrew Monroe Jr. The Monroes and the Burgesses were well known for loaning land in Coloma. And the boy's body was sent back, and he was buried. But the next namesake, Rufus Burgess III, was sent away to war, World War I. And with him, his mother sent a deed for land with the instructions that he was not to file the deed until after she died. And he did. The day after he died, he came back to Coloma, filed the deed, and left. That's intriguing.
I might add to that, Tina, that, and this is John speaking,
Yeah.
since we do have that deed, El Dorado County
Yeah.
shows no record of that deed ever being recorded, yet we have the actual deed and when it was recorded.
Right. So that's an amazing story. So what was going on? That was during the Red Summer after World War I, when Black farmers were trying to pull together as a union. And also African American soldiers were coming back from the war with their heads held high, ruined, as some people would think. So I don't know if it's always a move of color, but I know it's a move of land. There's so much. I was locked out of the archives. I'm locked out of the archives right now. There was so much I was coming, but I do think there's trying to discover, but there is ways that we can expand the narrative for all of us to include this narrative. And by putting this education on the state park level with those thousands and thousands of children who come in, and talking about it, not simply about where did the people go, but what they did while they were there, how they coexisted.
Do I need to raise my hand or something? Can you hear me?
Oh, no. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Hey there. Oh. Hi, Tina. You've been coming up with a lot of really stuff. Thank you for bringing it out. One thing that the courthouse burnt down in 1910 or 1911 that might have had your records in it that you're looking for. Also, the town of Shingle burnt down. Yeah, they may have had records too.
Yeah.
And another thing is that the park has the federal records of the Wampum tribe, which is the tribe that was spoken about by John Sutter. They know who the Wampum tribe is. Yet And even the Wampum tribe stands out there at those amachas. The
They were
bark,
at the base of the Coloma, correct?
uh-huh.
Yes, yes, I
And,
know.
and they helped build the mill in Coloma when
Mhm.
John Marshall was there. And yet the Coloma State Park pretends that they don't, know which Indians to put up there. And right now the Wampum have been out. They built those amachas, the bark teepees that are on site right now, and they've been out there, for the last 3-4 years doing Living History Day. Even though they've been getting a lot of flack from all kinds of other people for doing Living History Day out there. Oh, your costumes aren't authentic. You look like a bunch of white people, the whole bit. It's the types of responses they've been getting. But then they've been getting lots of really good responses from the public too. Of, we're glad you're out here. The other docents are glad that they're out there, and yet the park continues to pretend that, oh, we don't know which Indians belong to the area. Well, here's the genealogy. Here's the federal records. I mean, you can't get any better than actual federal records, right? That's like you're talking about quality of document.
You're after my heart. You're after my heart.
Yeah. So if you have that quality level of documentation, how could you say, oh, we don't know? That's the standard of documentation. So anyway, so there is this underlying funny thing going on communication wise with the park, and even in the new exhibit that the park put up, they have Miwoks in there, and they're oh, we had Shingle Springs who aren't from the area, we had other people go ahead and tell us what should be in there because we couldn't find you. Well, dude, they were standing out at the amachas the other day. What do you mean you can't find them? So it's conversations like this that go on with the state park. They're just absolutely, bizarre. I'm just letting you know that you're not the only one that in fact, we applaud what you're doing because it shows that we're not the only ones. The tribe isn't the only ones that this is happening to. This is happening to a lot of people.
You know what's amazing? I spent a lot of hours before I got locked out. I can say locked out because that's how I felt, but it was COVID, out of Coloma Archive. And there were people there who I did not know. And when we begin to talk about history, all of a sudden they were reaching into, well, you know what? I happen to see this and I happen to see that. And it was a collaborative work that was amazing. It warmed my heart.
Yes.
Person as a historian,
Mm-hmm.
and we were working together. Holly Thane, a state ranger, people I don't even know who were there just researching their genealogy.
Right.
Begin to build this idea of Coloma. And we need to have an opening. And I think I've heard from Stephen Hilton that he's looking at this idea of a citizen's history, but there has to be an opening or an expansion that allows these people, we're not going to get it right all the time, but we need to work it through and talk it through.
Right. It's going to be evolving because somebody picked up a little bit of information here, picked up a little bit of information there, and hey, I got something for you. It's this thing over here. And yes, Steve Hilton. So that at first the Wampumne's Tribal Council met with Steve Hilton about 1.5 years ago. Hi there, we want to put a garden out behind the amachas. Oh, well, that's a big deal. We have to get all these authorizations for a garden. And it's like, it's a native garden. It's plants. The tribe will go out there and go put it right behind the amachas because they chop the tribe's trees down that were giving them shade at the amachas when they're doing Living History Days there. So it turned into, oh, we need to poll all the other tribes in California to find out what's the appropriate way to represent Coloma. No, you don't, because the rest of the tribes in California have nothing to do with Coloma. That's like us going to Mojave down there, or and saying, oh, you need to do it like this. No, they don't know what anymore. So anyway, we would like to, the tribe has been wanting to go down to the state archives and go dig up a lot of the documents that you're talking about right now, because they also have documents like that, deeds of various pieces of land that somehow, you know, just vanished. And so they were told by experts in Washington, D.C. that the documentation would be in the state archives. So, hey,
You know, you have to love archival work, which I do, but it's slow and grueling and timely. It is just that, but it's worth every bit of it.
Right. So if you're going to be doing a field trip day down there, you know, we would like to join you.
Oh, that sounds like
the
fun.
archives together, at least then, you know, have an archive digging party.
That's so funny. I still have 18 when I left the archive, and on March, whatever it was, I was standing there at the window and saw my 18 boxes, and I was just like, please, please. So you'll probably get in there before I do.
Oh, they've been threatening to go down there for a while, so.
Yeah.
Lisa, you're also sort of an expert on census, and I know that topic of the census came up tonight. Is there anything that you might say about, you know, whatever census records back from the 1800s, and if you've even seen, you know, references to, you know, Black Americans on those records and what that looked like?
The first federal census was 1852,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty haphazard. They improved on their census taking abilities within the next decade very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So the translation or the reproduction of that census has been done by volunteers, in which they typed up the names.
Right.
But I do have a copy of it in an Excel spreadsheet. Somehow,
Oh, gosh,
I'm
I
going to
love that.
find a way to do that.
You know, because there was a small, at that in 1852, there was still a small number of African Americans, maybe just over 1,000 in California. But as the fugitive slave law came into effect, fugitive slave law, everybody was responsible for catching slaves. Even in the North, that's why the North got so mad about the Civil War, because you're going to bring us into slavery. That's when the influx came in. But I would be interested to know who were at the very, very beginning in 1852, who was there, and tax records, because all folks, I don't care what your color, you were paying taxes. And that's what I would like to get my hands on.
I could look for that Excel spreadsheet that I have of the 1852 census.
Please.
Oh, the other thing too, 329 Highway 49.
Oh.
The address 329 Highway 49 is on my list, my census list for this year, for this decade, to go and find out who lives at 329 Highway 49. Well, as far as I could tell, that's a house in Paloma.
Oh my. Oh no.
Yeah. It's one of the state park houses.
Oh no.
So I don't know.
What year?
Just in case. For 2020.
And when was it built? Or do you? Yeah, the back.
Oh, what year was it built? I have no idea. Actually, I looked it up on the county tax assessor records, and they don't have a record of 329 Highway 49.
Wow. I was just having a discussion about addresses and the lack of addresses for some of the conscripted or people who are taken into the army. Huh. 329 Highway 49. Amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's in downtown Coloma somewhere in the park. But for some reason, the US Census thinks somebody lives there.
Hmm.
All right. Well, this has been amazing. Is there last call? Any other questions? I mean, unless Tina, you just need to kind of close it down here because you've been so generous with this question session.
I've been locked in my room by myself with my books. This is wonderful.
Oh,
I apologize to y'all if I went overboard.
no, not at all. Not at all. This was just wonderful. I just, that was great. I think we heard from most folks, but I know there's, again, there's some new folks, and I hope nobody's feeling shy. Please, if anybody wants to just ask anything else, now's the time. Well, that might be the wrap for tonight, but and just for everybody, this was recorded and we will share this. I have now ventured into YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, and I will be trying to find an efficient way to get it condensed and uploaded. But yes, it will be available. So thank you so much, everybody, and we'll be back at our regular Thursday night program time next week. We have a guest speaker actually from Missouri, from she is still in St. Joseph, Missouri, at that Pony Express Museum, or she was a guest curator recently, but actually worked there in her career. So we have more to follow, and just really, really, really appreciate all the speakers, and appreciate, Tina, thank you for making the connection with this national park concept that we also want to, start doing some more work on, to just really, and again, I do feel that, it's important to bring these perspectives from outside of El Dorado County and outside of California to help, build this idea of a national park that really tells, a big story that's bigger than just California. And we all know that it's here. And we know that the state parks are sensitive about national parks. I don't know. It's just, it's just an identity thing, but we know that it can coexist and be very harmonious too. So anyway, wonderful session. Wonderful. Thank you for all the Burgess family for being here with us as well, and for bringing Tina to this group, to just make that connection. And, we just look forward to, developing more about this part of the story and all the connections with all of the stories. So thank you so much, Tina.
You're welcome. It's been such a pleasure. And I love to be back anytime you want me. I love to have you.
Great. Well, we will definitely look forward to that future program. So thanks to everyone for being with us tonight, and just stay tuned for the next program next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.